Hey folks, Doug Blake with Body Design University. In this video, I want to talk to you about two things to do when you're doing abdominal training, or two really effective tips. Now, there are a ton of things I could tell you about abdominal training. However, there's two main things I want you to keep in mind when you're doing most abdominal work, abdominal and core training. Now, aside from the standard crunches, straight on, doing the twisting movements, all those other sort of extraneous exercises that help to build or at least train the obliques, internal, external obliques, transverse abdominis. These two little tips, these pointers I want to give you are designed specifically for the rectus abdominis. Now, don't get me wrong. All of your abdominal muscles will be working no matter what type of exercise you ever do. They are all going to get engaged. The question, of course, is always how much are you engaging, for instance, the internal, external obliques versus the other particular muscle groups of the abdominals and core. And that's one of the reasons why we do the twisting movements, things like that, to engage certain muscle groups over others. But again, in this case, there's two things I want you to kind of think about or keep in mind when training abdominals. The first one is just really a review of basic biomechanics. Now, the abdominals, unlike any other muscle that we train, requires a basic change in how we move and position our torso. Every exercise you ever do, I'm talking every exercise in some way, shape, or form, is going to involve a position where you have the rib cage up, right? So, and that would include obviously the extension of the lumbar spine. So lifting up the rib cage creates a more effective positioning of the lordotic curve of the lumbar spine. It also simultaneously does two things. So when I lift up my rib cage, aside from lumbar extension or extension of the lower spinal column, I get two other main things, really important things that are going to occur here. So one is going to be retraction of the shoulder girdle, and the other is going to be a either neutral or external rotation of my humerus at the shoulder. So those three things are critical when I do dumbbell curls, tricep pushdowns, lateral raises, bench presses, rowing, you name it in some way, shape, or form. Those three movements are critical, proper biomechanics to train the particular muscle groups that I just spoke about with the exercises themselves. So increased lordotic curve in the lumbar spine, right? Retraction of the shoulder blades, or the shoulder girdle retraction, meaning squeeze your shoulder blades back behind you. And that will also generally simultaneously increase the external rotation at the humerus. And all of those three basic things can be accomplished, believe it or not, by giving a simple cue to your client. Lift up your rib cage. And as soon as you lift up the rib cage, the lower back arches, the scapulae are going to move back and try and squeeze together, and you're going to have an external rotation generally of the humerus. Now, again, all other exercises, but here's the tip for abdominals. It's the exact opposite, because what do the abdominal muscles do? They flex the spinal column. So again, everything that you do with all your other exercises, again, review of basic biomechanics of abdominal and core training, is that now you do just the opposite. You actually want to go into the fetal position, right? You want to collapse the rib cage, exhale all the air out of your lungs. This is critical. You're going to protract the shoulder girdle and probably internally rotate the humerus, although that's not really that necessary. But the point is I get my chin down. Everything I tell you not to do during your other resistance training exercises, I tell you that's what I want you to do during abdominal training, because you've got to, that's what the abdominals do, all right? At least the rectus abdominis, right? Which is the six-pack part of your ab core musculature. So you collapse the rib cage, you exhale, get all the air out of your lungs so that the rib cage can actually collapse downward. And that's what's going to allow the abdominal muscles to shorten, contract. So protraction of the shoulder girdle. This also allows with this inducing of the fetal position, which is what you're trying to do when you're training abdominals. So that's tip number one. Do the exact opposite of everything you've ever heard me tell you about proper biomechanics for all your other muscle groups, right? So that, okay, tip number one. Tip number two is, as much as I like doing crunches and all this side stuff and all that's all great, don't not do that. But here's tip number 2. Always, I do it every time I train, always try and get an exercise that uses the lower body as your resistance. In other words, some sort of what we call reverse trunk curls. And this basically involves having the torso stable. So imagine lying on your back, arms at your sides, right? With your head and chin tucked forward, rib cage collapsed a little bit, and then lifting your hips or your legs. If you've ever seen somebody do leg raises. Now, I'm not saying to do leg raises because that's more hip flexion than it is pelvic movement of the pelvis or spinal flexion. But the idea is that if you can bring your knees in, for instance, bend your knees a little bit, then try and lift your hips, your boots, your glutes, your butt up off the ground. That's spinal flexion. But instead of moving the torso to flex the spinal column, you're keeping your torso stable and you're moving your pelvis. There's a whole lot more weight and resistance that's going to be used in exercises like that. Anything from hanging and trying to lift your hips up. Again, these are all what we call, they fall under this one sort of broad category of what's known as reverse trunk curls, or flexing the spinal column, but doing it with the torso stable and the pelvis moving. Again, resistance wise, there's a lot more weight that you're able to use. It's a great way to train your abdominals. So again, 2 main tips. I can go on for an hour, maybe longer, if I wanted to include every tip for abdominals, but those are the 2 main things that I definitely recommend you, number one, ensure that you do with the first one, which is just, again, a review of proper biomechanics, collapsing of the rib cage, fetal position, exhaling, tensing and flexing your abdominals. That's the first one. Second one is using your hips versus the weight of your torso, like in a crunch, but using your hips as the weight or means of resistance when you do them. Now, if this was helpful, too quick. I mean, those are quick and easy, right? So if this was helpful, please type the word understand in the comment box below. By the way, if you want to become a certified, qualified personal trainer, then please click on the link in the discussion box below. As always, if you watch these videos, we do appreciate if you would give us a like, okay, subscribe to the channel. And by the way, you can share it as well. There's nothing wrong with sharing these videos, even with folks that are not going to be trainers, because they can actually be helpful for just about anybody that does exercises. Okay, so as always, we are here to help you with all of your questions and issues related to exercise. And by the way, one of the things we try to do here at Body Design University is also give you live studies, and that occurs every Wednesday night at 6 p.m. to 6:30 Eastern Standard Time. So come to our live studies. It's really, really very effective, very helpful to help you pass your exams. We use Quizlet. Now, Quizlet is just an app that helps you to memorize and learn terms and concepts. We use it. We create what's known as Quizlet Live. It's really very helpful. A lot of fun, but it's 30 minutes. 30 minutes goes by. It's very, very fast. We create this competitive environment, and it'll just help you for sure. Have a great week. We'll see you next.